The first thing, ladies and gentlemen, that I always do is just to try to introduce who we are in the Department of International Relations and Cooperation. Specifically, ladies and gentlemen, look, we execute what we call 4 foreign policy priorities, just 4. We execute what we call Pan-Africanism, African solidarity, and we do that having understanding that our future in South Africa are tied to the futures of the rest of the African states. So why I say that, because South Africa is one of 55 member states of the African Union. And if you look at the top 5 economies, ladies and gentlemen, in Africa, South Africa from the SADC region, where we are actually the leading economy in terms of GDP, but also we are now also the most industrialized economy. But more importantly, I think what we need to understand is our relationship between South Africa and our sister countries such as Egypt, Algeria, Nigeria, Morocco, because those are the countries that are basically within the top economies on the African continent. Secondly, ladies and gentlemen, and this is important, you had the privilege to engage with the Chief General Mbata yesterday, and I hope it drew correlation between peace and security and the African agenda. For example, if there is instability in the northern part of Mozambique, in Capital Gado, because of Islamic insurgency, why South Africa then becomes what we call a troop contributing country is to ensure the stability, ladies and gentlemen. Because Mozambique have what we call unique levels of gas repository within the country. And remember, we have an energy deficit in South Africa. So it goes without showing that we have what we call a national interest to ensure there's stability in Mozambique, so that the gas deposits of Mozambique ultimately through SADC's power pool will be able also to benefit the South African energy enhancement. When there's difficulties in the Great Lakes region in the DRC, it is important for you to understand why South Africa have to be a troop contributor in the DRC to ensure the stability of the entire SADC region. And we'll obviously speak about that issue. The second foreign policy priority, ladies and gentlemen, we speak about global solidarity. It's a fundamental policy priority, so that when you hear South Africa speaks about the genocide that the state of Israel are committing against the people of Palestine, and when you hear about the unilateral economic embargo that the USA has leveled against the people of Cuba, and when you hear about the struggle for self-determination of the people of Western Sahara against the Kingdom of Morocco, those are 3 critical elements within the execution of our foreign policy, where we speak about global South solidarity. Global South solidarity, ladies and gentlemen, just means where there is underdevelopment, where there's vulnerability, there is where South African foreign policy should actually be directed to. The third and critical foreign policy priority is what we call North-South cooperation. What it says, ladies and gentlemen, is that we can't industrialize South Africa to the extent to which we should be industrialized unless we engage your more developed economies. And it's one of the pivotal reasons why we are, for example, a member of the G20, why, for example, South Africa continued to engage with the G7, with the European Union, etc. Because the commitments that Europe have made, that your industrialized economies have made towards South Africa, have actually led to our own industrialization. For example, if you look at our automotive sector, look at your car manufacturing processes in South Africa. We get to be industrialized because of the levels of bilateral trade relationships that we are having with your industrialized countries. So when you see President Ramaphosa goes to the White House to engage the US head of state, it's because of the understanding that you require the G7 nations generally, and in particular the US, to have a strengthened partnership relationship with South Africa. If you don't have it, ladies and gentlemen, if you don't have a cogent trade relations with the USA, for example, just as one of the members of the G7 nations, you are likely to face a job deficit of 100,000 jobs in South Africa. So you need the US in relation to our own national imperatives. And obviously the last and the fourth foreign policy priority speaks about the global governance institutions and what we call deepening of multilateralism. Now, global governance institutions, ladies and gentlemen, speaks about, for example, the United Nations as the premier and the apex organization. And then you have a number of organs of the UN, which we think as South Africa needs to change and needs to transform. For example, the United Nations Security Council. Now, the major problem in the United Nations Security Council, it was established as a result of the World War II. And you have what we call a veto power of 5 states that have the say on the world order, on peace and security. Those 5 states, it's the US, it's the UK, it's France, it's China, and it's Russia. And what we are saying as South Africa is that 85% of conflicts in the world relates to the global south, and in particular the African continent. It can't be correct that if the role of the United Nations Security Council is to resolve conflicts in the world, and the majority of conflicts is in the global south and in Africa in particular, that we don't have a permanent seat as Africa at the UN Security Council. And that's why we are key, what we call proponents for the change of the United Nations Security Council, the UNSC, through the what we call the CERTI Declaration and the Ezulweni Consensus. And then lastly, as a typical example on global governance institutions, you will recall, ladies and gentlemen, that a couple of years back there was a big outcry in South Africa on the International Criminal Court, if you can recall it. Remember, there was the criminal indictment instituted against then Sudanese President Bashir. And South Africa was then obligated through a court order to ensure that any person that gets to be criminally charged by the ICC must be arrested on the African continent, in South Africa. We then had a case on the occasions of 2 years back of the 15th BRICS Summit convened in Johannesburg, that the ICC issued a criminal indictment against the person of President Putin of Russia. We were then obligated to respond positively to the court order, meaning, ladies and gentlemen, if President Putin had to set his foot on the South African continent, we were obligated to effect an arrest or attempt to effect an arrest, notwithstanding that Russia is a nuclear power, and the Russian Foreign Ministry have said any person that seeks to engage or impede the human mobility of the head of state of the Russian Federation will result in a declaration of war. So we had to deal with those issues to an extent that the President Ramaphosa himself had to engage in unique diplomatic mastery engagements with the Russians to ensure that we manage properly our responsibility towards the International Criminal Court and our responsibility in BRICS. But now, what you expect from one side to do, everyone must do it, isn't it so? Now the ICC issued a criminal indictment against the head of government of the Israeli state, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Hungary have refused to execute an arrest. The US has refused to execute an arrest. So the rules that applies to your developing nations does not seem to apply to your developed economies. Do you guys understand what we are saying? So that is why, as we speak today, we are in the International Court of Justice against the state of Israel because of the genocide that they are executing against the innocent people of Palestine. So, ladies and gentlemen, my preface of my presentation sought to just introduce who I am and what we do in the Department of International Relations and Cooperation. Let me once again, extend gratitude to the leadership of the Black Business Chamber here in Postmansberg for this opportunity, ladies and gentlemen. We want to obviously ensure that this partnership with the Tsantsabane mayor and the chamber, we continue to engage in those issues. But I think Tsantsabane is uniquely located, given the fact that it's worldwide a repository of iron ore mineral deposits worldwide, not only in the African continent, not only in South Africa, but when we speak about PMG mining group, mining deposits, you speak about Tsantsabane, ladies and gentlemen. So Tsantsabane powers what we call the steel works in East Asia. It obviously, ladies and gentlemen, powers steel works within the Nordic countries. You have seen that the renewable corridors of the Northern Cape anchors what we call your green energy transitions processes. And you see that Tsantsabane really is an expression, when we speak about critical minerals, it's actually an expression about what we need to achieve. Now, a good opportunity for this chamber, ladies and gentlemen, is that the African Union in December last year endorsed its own critical mineral strategy. South Africa, subsequent to that, domesticated that strategy. In, I think it was in May 2025, Minister of Minerals, Minister Gwede Mantashe, unveils our own critical mineral strategy. Our biggest deficit as the Southern African Development Community, SADC, is that the AU have its critical mineral strategy, South Africa have its own, but SADC is a regional bloc, ladies and gentlemen, do not have a critical mineral strategy. Now, why that is important for people of Postmansberg and of the Northern Cape to understand is that you can't, for example, make a deal on your mineral deposits without a strategy, isn't it so? You can't do it. So if you see in the news that you have African countries that goes to Europe, that goes to North America and make deals. The deals is made outside of the purview of a critical mineral strategy. So it can't be a good deal for the African continent or for the ordinary people of, within Africa. And that's why we are making a point here that this initiative from the Chamber brings a catalyst between global debates of G20 and actually what must be able to achieve. It just can't be correct that at the point of extraction, there is no local beneficiation that are added. And secondly, the levels of community empowerment goes against what the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres advocate, where he says there must be equity and community ownership and sharing within the benefits of your critical mineral strategy. So I thought, ladies and gentlemen, it's important obviously to make that point. The reality is that when we speak about green energy transition, when we speak about peace and security, the African continent has all the minerals that are required in terms of your green energy transition, especially in terms of your electric vehicles. Iron ore has a very unique place in terms of the industrialization or the continued industrialization of your more advanced and developed economies. But obviously what this Chamber's event and dialogue will seek to achieve, there is the reality that as we speak, Minister Tau, Minister Lamola, and a number of economic envoys are in the US as we currently speak, with a very specific mandate to engage on what we call a trade deal with the USA. After the proposal from the USA of a very high trade punitive measures that they have imposed on South Africa. But I think what it suggests, ladies and gentlemen, and this is important because President Ramaphosa also spoken about this issue, it means that we need to diversify our trade mix. What it means for Postmansberg and the people of Tsantsabane is that we need to drive very hard the issues about manufacturing and industrialization at the point of extraction. So this is what the South African critical mineral strategy speaks about, that at the point of extraction, we need to ensure there is a level of industrialization. Now, if you do a snapshot around Postmansberg, what I've witnessed as we drove to Postmansberg is the high levels of what we call heavy load transport stations that are taking iron ore outside of Postmansberg, isn't it so? Now there's no problem with that because it will seek to enhance our bilateral trade figures. But the deficit in that approach is that you don't have a manufacturing facility here. Now, what you have a young man here that are chairing a G20 dialogue here in Tsantsabane. But we don't have a possibility to say that out of the iron ore production here in Tsantsabane, from all the mines, that you have a manufacturing facility as it relates to iron ore products. Now, it's one of the biggest pitfalls in terms of how we have done economic diplomacy. And I think, Chair, it's quite important that we use today to reshape the type of thinking that must be in the leadership of the local municipality, but also in terms of the leadership of the Black Business Chamber. Because what I'm suggesting is not things that ordinarily should not be done. Other nations get to be industrialized because of us. For example, Chair, we need an economic GDP growth of what, 3%, isn't it so, to create more jobs. Our economy is likely to grow during 2025, 2026 at 1.5%. That is the GDP estimates brought from IMF, and it's more or less in sync with what the South African Reserve Bank and National Treasury speaks about. It means that if we want to do a death knell to youth unemployment of, in particular, young people in South Africa, we need to manufacture, we need to industrialize. So the fact that the mines have what we call social and labor plans, it's important, but it's not adequate. It's important, but it's not adequate. So you have your social and labor plans from the mines, and then you have your social and labor development obligations from solar companies. But what we need to engage as a form of dialogue with your mining houses is the extent of productive capabilities. We need, Mayor, as part of your contributions to the Tsantsabane community, we need to have very concrete discussions with the mines in terms of manufacturing facilities for the people of Tsantsabane, in particular focusing on young people and on women. If we don't have that, then this Kagisho, this debate, Hompiano, will be a debate where we make sense about broad political economy, but we have not been able to domesticate the politics of critical minerals to Tsantsabane municipality. Now the fact, and you know, the Premier Sol have raised this issue in one of the cabinet lekgotlas. Remember, most of the mines here locally, the head offices are in Gauteng, isn't it so? So the GDP contribution of the Northern Cape, in real terms, actually is understated because of the formula that Statistics South Africa does. Because the GDP that are being recorded here are transmitted to the head offices of mining companies. So the only way, ladies and gentlemen, how we moderate that abnormally would be through manufacturing and productive facilities right here in Tsantsabane. And I'm raising it that one of the issues that the Tsantsabane Black Business Chamber must start to look at in terms of this engagement is to ask few critical questions. What is a special economic zone? What is a special economic zone? What is the benefits of Tsantsabane municipality to have as an ultimate outcome a special economic zone being designated in Tsantsabane? What is the benefits of it? What is the benefits of Tsantsabane municipality to be regarded as a high-end economic corridor? Those are the three critical questions that the leadership of the chamber must seek to answer. For example, I know in the Northern Cape, there is, I think is a Kema municipality in Aghanes. It's a very high-end economic zone. And then I think in Buchu Bay, the Alexander Bay area, it's also intended to be a high-end economic zone. What we need to understand is that Tsantsabane, as part of what we call a mining belt or mining corridor, Tsantsabane together with Hamahara, do you suggest that these two municipalities, by the way, the municipality of Hamahara in terms of GDP and of Tsantsabane is the highest in South Africa. So why are we not able to then ask an important question, Kagisho? Do we suggest that these two municipalities could not become economic zones in terms of considering engagements on it being declared as a special economic zones? It's not an aspect that I must be able to answer. But if you want to develop critical minerals and ensure Uguti here, there's no poverty, then we need a particular designation for this area. As we speak now, Mayor, there's no designation for Tsantsabane, apart from the fact that it's a high-end mineral producing municipality, the same with Hamahara. But there's no specific designation. I'm suggesting that if you look at the critical mineral strategy and you look what it advocates that this area must be treated as a special child. But if you want to have a special child, you must then have a particular special architecture in relation to those issues.